Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Tammy Tuckey Show. I'm Tammy Tuckey, and it's so good to see you. So tonight we have a special guest who has worked on two films. The first film was Wonders of China at EPCOT that premiered in 1982, and also its follow-up, Reflections of China, which came out in 2003. But before I introduce him, let's play a little clip from the actual films. So let's welcome this evening the director himself, Jeff Blyth, to the show. Welcome, jazz hands.
Hey, how you doing,
How
Jamie?
are you? Long time no see.
Yeah, really. I think the first time we met was in Florida for the Buena Vista Historical Society convention or whatever that was.
That was fun. That was Retro Magic. Were you at the last one or you were at the 2019 one?
It was a couple of years ago, whatever that one was.
I think it was the one before COVID hit, and
Yeah.
we finally got to meet in person. But I think I chatted with you back in 2016 for my original version of my podcast, the Tiara Talk Show, and we kind of really geared towards the timekeeper on that one because that was one I truly grew up with and just adored, and I had so many questions about it, and we kind of really didn't hit the precipice of your other films that you've worked on, especially Wonders of China. And that's just a special film that many of us know who are big Disney fans and kind of walking around Epcot. And there's sometimes there's little to do in each pavilion, but with China, they get this beautiful film that you created. So back in 1982. And I didn't realize you had a book where you talked about your experience creating both films. So it's called Polishing the Dragons, Making Epcot's Wonders of China. And you released this recently, and I grabbed a hold of a copy. And not only do you tell a riveting story, but you include images behind the scenes of how you created the film. So we're going to talk all about it. But my first question was going to be, why don't you tell us about the first approach by Disney to be able to work on this project back in, I think it was 1980, right?
Yes, they contacted a company that I was working for in 1980. And we, at the time, we did IMAX movies and second unit work for films. And we had done some second unit work for The Shining, for Warner Brothers. And Disney had seen some of the stuff and said, hey, maybe these guys could do this film for China for the opening of Epcot. And the thing you have to understand is Epcot was this enormous alarm clock that was going to go off on October 1st, 1982. And everything was based on that clock. That was when, you had whatever you were working on, you were done on that day because the park was going to open. And so we had this window that said, you've got to make the film in this limited period of time. And when they first approached the company, we were going to be busy. We had something else going on. And we took the meeting with Disney. I was quite excited about it because even though I'd never been to China, I had studied quite a bit about it and was quite knowledgeable for a novice. And what ended up happening was they said, the company said, okay, you go ahead and make the film. me. And it was, it was great. It was you jump onto the train, and not to mix metaphors, but the train was going to arrive at the station October 1st, 2 years later. And so it was, you've got to have a film. And so I dove into all the research that I could, but keep in mind, no Google, no internet. It was go to bookstores, go to libraries. I literally ransacked the local Chinatown, finding books mostly in Chinese, finding every postcard I could find that had scenery from China. And it was get up to speed, understand the width and the breadth of what was out there, what could possibly be in the film. I mean, if somebody, approached you and said, we want you to do a film on America, you could sit down and make a pretty good list in short order, just from, your knowledge of the country. And I had none of that. It was like starting from scratch, figure out where these things are and how does it all fit together into a coherent film. So I put together 3 books that were like picture books, really, of some of them were postcards, some of them were pages I had torn out of these Chinese landscape books, pictures, but I had done research on all of them, so I could speak to each of these locations, and there were about 150 of them. And when I went to China for that first negotiation, that would have been January of '81, it was, okay, defend each of these choices that you've made. Why did you pick these? Well, the Chinese were very, very skeptical. They didn't even have a theme park in China at the time, so they didn't know. They had a hard time referencing what it was we wanted to do. It was hard enough to explain to an American at that point what EPCOT was going to be, and so I had to explain that to them. On top of that, I had to explain we were going to do this in 360 degrees. And so this was a film format that I had never used. I'd made big movies, with IMAX, but not 360. And so the Chinese were even more skeptical about that and how that was all going to work, and how are you going to go to these locations and what did you intend to shoot? And so they were quite fearful initially about what the camera could see.
Wasn't it a tumultuous time as well, too, politically? Or what were your thoughts?
Well, we were arriving at a time that was just after we were still hearing the echoes of the Cultural Revolution, which had officially come to a close in 1976. But while we were in China, there were people still being on trial from the Cultural Revolution. So, it was still a kind of a day-to-day news thing. And so there was a fair amount of instability there. But the good thing for us and for Disney and for fans of EPCOT was that we were given a group within the Chinese government called China Co-Film. And that was sort of the point group that we did everything through them. And they were the only people that we had to be responsible to. They were running things up the flagpole and, taking things to the, who knows how far up the flagpole they had to go to get permission for some of this stuff. But we only had one organization, one group to deal with. Sometimes it would mean, you wouldn't get an answer for a couple of weeks. Meanwhile, we were, progressing, doing other things. But sometimes a question would come up and you'd have to wait a long time for an answer. But in that initial meeting, when I was discussing these things, as I said, there was 150 locations on my list to start with. And we never got a yes on anything. We got a lot of no's. And so it was like,
I would have been nervous. I'd have been like, can't even guess what day to day is going to be like. Because how long were you there for? Was it a 2-month shoot or longer?
No, initially that first negotiation was for a week, and then I came back for a month of scouting locations in that spring. Then I came back, excuse me, for another month of scouting at the end of the summer, followed immediately by 2 months of shooting. And
Wow.
part of that was because
Ooh.
the studio had said, whenever they open the door to us filming, you have to get enough material that we've got something to open at EPCOT, that ticking clock that says you
Yeah.
must have some film there. So that's why we had a 2-month initial shoot. But then we came back the following winter and shot for another month, and then came back in the spring, that was the spring of 82, and shot for one more month. So it was a total of 4 months of shooting, 2 months of scouting, and the length and breadth of China. We were everywhere.
And all those hours of preparation of just trying to find out, research wise, you put in a lot of time and effort. And this, again, we're in 1982 when the park is about to open, right? And I guess the logistics of having a 360 camera, and also, should we also mention that it was film? So I think a lot of people forget that we're not in the digital phase; we're in actual film. So what were you were shooting on? What, not 35 millimeter? What was the highest one? 64?
No, 35 millimeter.
35? Okay.
It's 9 35 millimeter cameras. And our shooting day was dominated by one fact of life, which is those cameras would each hold only 400 feet of film, which is about 3.5 minutes of material. And that means that in the middle of the day somewhere, you would have to stop and reload those cameras. And normally that's not a big deal on a movie set. For us to do it, we had to shut down for an hour to reload that many cameras. And, because it's physical film, and it's not just physical film. It's, 19 rolls of film that are coming out of the camera and another 9 that are going into the cameras. And just the logistics of all of that was, that would control our day to a great degree, so that when I was mapping out our shooting schedule, it would be, all right, we'll do these, this part of the shot, or these things in the morning, and then we'll break for lunch, reload the film, come back after lunch and get another load of film and do some more. And when we were doing the helicopter photography, it was even more complex, because you're trying to shoot even more film. And we had a real problem with shooting with the helicopter, as I mentioned in my book. We were filming in a beautiful, beautiful area, one of the most beautiful areas in China, but it's tropical, and so you have a lot of bugs, and the bugs would hit our lenses, actually the mirrors, and we would, the helicopter would go up and come back down, and you wouldn't know if you got any footage at all, because you'd look at the mirrors, and the mirrors are covered in bugs, dead bugs.
Oh my gosh.
And so you're thinking, well, we know when we took off, those mirrors were spotless. So when did we get the bugs? Was it coming in for a landing when we were done, or was it 10 seconds after we took off? There was no way to know. And so the only solution to that was to just keep shooting and just shoot more and more material. Just go back up and shoot again, go back up, shoot again, with the idea that somewhere in there have to be shots that don't have bugs on the mirrors.
So you had no dailies?
We didn't even have weeklies. No, we had no way of knowing what we got. We would send the footage home raw, undeveloped, to the studio. They would look at it. They would look at the dailies and give us a report back, but they didn't know what I was shooting or how it fit in with anything else. All they could say was, yeah,
quality's good.
Yeah, looks good. Or, we would send a note and say, hey, look for bugs on the mirror in the helicopter shots, that sort of, and they'd say, yeah, there's some bugs, like they'd say on roll 307, you got some bugs about 45 seconds into the shots, or this roll was mostly good or whatever. And so, to be perfectly honest, we didn't really know what we had until I could come back to the studio and really go through it shot by shot and say, all right, yeah, we did get this. Because
So
as your listeners might not understand, with 360 and 9 cameras, you can't mix and match cameras. You can't say, well, I got the left-hand side of this and it looks great, but the right-hand side has a problem.
it's got to be the whole shot.
It's the whole shot all the way through.
Now, when they're sending back this film footage, this is the worrisome me coming out. So they're putting it them in canisters, and are they shipping them immediately? Are they? I don't think there was overnight at this time, but were they shipping them back immediately after each day, so nothing would go, nothing would go wrong? Or
every couple of days we'd have a shipment. We had a customs broker in Beijing that was. That knew what we were doing and how we were doing it. And they had to be able to get this stuff out of the country and not get x-rayed and send that all the way back to the studio for development. And there were a lot of discussions. The Chinese would have loved for us to develop the film locally, but Circle Vision, to develop 9 cameras simultaneously, is a very difficult process. And as I've done Circle Vision movies around the world, we would always go to the nearest Technicolor laboratory because they were set up and they could do that. Because you want to, I'll give you an example. If you've got 9 rolls of film, you put them in at the beginning of the night that they're developing film. Well, the chemicals are different at the beginning of the shift than they are at the end of the shift. It's not that much that you'd notice a difference in a regular movie, but for Circle Vision, if all that film didn't go through the chemicals at the same time, you'd get all these weird things of different colors, different shifts from screen to screen to screen to screen. And so that was part of the control process, was it could only be done at a Technicolor laboratory.
So were you a part of the installation process to make sure, because again, 1982, you're having actual film projectors, 9 of them, right, in the theater that are projecting the actual film itself. So are you there to make sure that was added into the actual theater that they built for this, or was that not part of your?
I wasn't part of the installation process, the physical installation of the building of the theater and the projectors, and each film is in a separate loop cabinet. And the idea is that the film, once it's done, is this one big, long, elaborate loop, so that when it goes into the projector, when it gets to the end of the show, it's already at the beginning of the show, ready for the next group coming in. Mm-hmm. So you've got these loop cabinets for each film. These all have to be built and installed, and quite an elaborate behind the scenes thing. So I went to see my film because, before EPCOT opened, because what we're looking for is all the work that we've done on the soundtrack and everything else, and all the pictures and all the editing that we've done. What does it really look like once it's in the theater? What does it sound like in the theater? Circle Vision is not a great process for the way sound is going to be heard in the theater, because you've got essentially a round box, and even though you've got separate speakers behind every screen, they're aimed at each other, so the sound is kind of mixing and bouncing off the walls, and so you get a totally different sound when there are people in the theater. The film sounds totally different in an empty theater than when there are people in there. Why? Because people are wearing clothing, people are talking, but the clothing absorbs a lot of frequencies, and a lot of the stuff sort of bounces and absorbs off of them. And so you try to mix the sound anticipating a certain size crowd in the theater. I did one of the Circle Vision films I did for Disney, just to jump off for a moment, was for Expo 86 for a film called Portraits of Canada. And we had enough time on that particular show that we mixed the sound, got it the way we liked it, and I flew the entire crew up to Vancouver so we could hear it in a theater. And the client, which was the phone company, they brought in 1,000 people, put them in the theater, and so we could hear it with a crowd. And the sound mixers were going, "Oh, we should do this every time." Well, we only did it that one time because I was the producer that time and I could afford to do it. So, but
Well,
it does make a difference.
My dad was a projectionist. He's actually in the chat. So his question is, film stock is expensive. So how much film was shot in the original version that you created that was not used?
Of the 150 locations, we got permission to do 72. There are 71 in the movie. So there was only one location that we didn't use. And we ended up using that in Reflections of China. We were able to pull that out. And when we did Reflections of China, we were actually able to not reuse. I mean, there are some scenes that are identical that got pulled out. But there were some, like the aerials, where we said we've got alternate takes that haven't been seen by an audience before. And so we were able to do that. We shot about 150,000 feet of film for Wonders of China. If that answers.
So one more key thing, you mentioned Randy Bright, who was also one of the producers on this project, right? And we've mentioned him so many
from American Adventure.
Big fan. And we've mentioned him so many times on this podcast.
Sure.
We had both of his kids on the show. And I just wanted to ask, what was he like to work with? Because he was one of the key figures in making EPCOT really a true reality.
I've had a long career, and I don't think I've ever met anybody nicer than Randy Bright. He was just an absolute delight to work with. I'd pay good money to have 5 more minutes with Randy. He was just a terrific guy, and he doesn't get nearly enough credit for all of the things that he was doing. I mean, he would get credit just for American Adventure, but he had 34 different film projects of different sizes and scope. I mean, like one of them was little clips that were going to play in the Mexican boat ride.
Yeah.
Somebody has to go out and shoot the cliff divers or whatever. Randy was responsible for all of those, including, Wonders of China and Impressions of France and O Canada and all of this stuff. And then, and then on top of that, he was doing American Adventure. So it was like, wow, what he pulled off was still remarkable today.
And it's wonderful because, back, I don't know what year this was. I think 2002, 2001, they approached you. Was it Disney who approached you and said, we want to update the film, or China's asking to update the film? How did that conversation begin?
It began when the film premiered. The Chinese had very high praise for the film when it opened.
That's good. Yeah.
In fact, the Chinese ambassador came down, and it was all the hoopla that Disney does for a big premiere. And this guy sees the film, and then he comes walking out of the theater, and here's just all the press and all the microphones and cameras, and I'm dying 1,000 deaths because I don't know, whether, I'm thinking, did I even get to the province that this guy is from? Did I film in his hometown? I don't know. I don't know this guy. He's just the Chinese ambassador. And he comes up to the microphones and he says, there's only one thing wrong with this film. Oh, what is that, please? And he says, it's not long enough. And I thought, okay, I can accept that as a complaint. So there was stuff that they wanted to be able to start including, and they were, bending the ear of the studio executives right from the time it opened, saying, we want more. We want to put things in there, and how do we get you back? And because you mentioned the politics of the era of when we were filming, and because it was that leftover period of time post Mao, not all that long after Mao, there were people on the streets wearing Mao jackets that we filmed. And so there were a number of scenes where our extras that showed up, though, I mean, we'd bring in extras to walk on the Great Wall or walk through the Forbidden City or whatever. And we'd hire these people, but they're wearing Mao jackets, which, would be like, if you made a film and everybody's wearing leisure suits, you'd say, we need to change that. How can we go back and refilm that? So there were things like that we were addressing almost immediately of how do we get around that? How do we fix that in a new version? And that's what Reflections was. That's how it started out. When they approached me, they said, yeah, we've got these scenes, they'd mention every scene that had somebody in a Mao jacket. And they'd say, well, we want to redo these. It's like, okay, great. But the guy that played Li Po, the Chinese narrator of the film, is now way too old to play the part. So we had to find a replacement for him to film on, as you showed in that clip. That was the replacement Li Po that we were filming on the Great Wall. So we had a handful of scenes that we were going to do. And so we went off and we did a survey and we go, okay, great. We're going to do this and this and this and this and this. And we come back to the studio to Imagineering to make a presentation. And we've got the whole film, the original film, all done in storyboards, all laid out. And then we've got the new pictures that we've taken. We go around taking all these still photographs to make these long banded photos of each potential location. And we're going to put them all together. And we realized that much of this original film was going to stay the same for like the first 4 or 5 minutes. It was still going to be like the first film. And they were only going to do this sort of swapping out of, well, we'll take this one out and put that one in and so on. But they weren't going to do that on some of the initial stuff. And I thought, you can't sell that as a new film. Not if you're going to go 4 or 5 minutes in before somebody goes, oh, wait, that's a new shot. You need to, it needs to feel new right from the get-go. So I ended up proposing an alternate version. I wish they had told me this, that this was their plan to promote it and market it as a new film. I wish they'd told me that before I went off on the survey, but they hadn't. So I reconfigured the whole film and made a new presentation. And there were a couple of new shots that got added, like that one of Li Po on the wall, to basically say, it's a new film, folks. And so that's what we did. That's what we accomplished there.
Well, let's take a look at another clip from your behind the scenes. I saw that you had posted these on YouTube. So let's take another clip. Take a look at another clip. Here we go. Cool. Just to see I love the additional footage of the actual people of China. I think it's so interesting to see, everybody getting to showcase what they do there. And I love that. And I love this clip to just show how you guys are getting those shots together and meeting these individuals. So getting the chance to travel over to another country, what was one of the most surprising things that you learned while you were on location for each version?
Well, when I did the first one, China was coming out of a really, they were the sleeping giant of Asia. And Mao famously said at the start of the country, when they declared their that they were a republic. He said the Chinese people have stood up. And by the time we got to Reflections of China, which was 20 years after the first one, I said the Chinese are running at full speed, because this was a country that had gone from 0 to 60, in a generation. When we filmed the first movie, Beijing the streets were just jammed with millions of bicycles and a handful of cars. And when we came back for Reflections of China, it was just the reverse. A handful of bicycles and millions of cars. And so if you stop and think about that, we have millions of cars in America, but you probably went to driver's training in high school, and if not that, your mom or your dad taught you, and there were people to teach you how to drive a car. Who taught all these people to drive cars when they were riding bicycles the last time we were there? And I mean, it was that kind of transformative revolution, if you will, that was stunning to see. That they went from old steam trains that we filmed in the first one to, a maglev high-speed train. It's like, where is this coming
That's
from?
cool.
How do the Chinese people get their brains around that? Because it happened in a generation.
Mm-hmm. And again, I do want to highlight, remember, Polishing the Dragons. In the show notes below this video clip, you can click a link to buy it on Amazon. And it's an amazing book. You get to have some behind the scenes photos, wonderful stories from Jeff. You're not going to hear them all tonight because we want you to get the book. We have somebody in the audience, Dr. Good Guy says, I enjoy having Reflections on in the background when I'm writing and studying. Often I'll go through all the World Showcase films, but I love to start with this one. That's nice.
Great. That's wonderful.
My dad has another question. Are there any plans to convert it to digital, or has that already happened?
Actually, this year, they were supposed to introduce a new digital film. And I had been telling everybody, okay, Reflections is going away. It's put in its 20 years. It's time for a new generation. And it was going to be a seamless digital presentation. And I kept waiting and waiting, and it hasn't happened yet. And it was funny because I had sent some relatives of mine. They were going to go to Florida. They said, oh, we'll go to EPCOT and we'll watch your film. And I said, well, it's probably not there right now. They were going to replace it this year with this digital presentation. And they sent me back pictures and they said, nope, it's still Reflections of China. So I'm not the person to ask as to when it will be done, but it is going to be done. Now, it's not a conversion of my film, of either of my films. It's a whole new production because it's a whole digital process and a special camera that takes a 360 picture. I mean, that's another thing is that has changed so dramatically over the years that, when we first started making films, it was before computers. And by the time we got to the second one, obviously we could do things digitally and not that there's any CG work that's in the film, but it was possible to do that. And I did a film years ago, again, the one for Canada, where in 1984, we needed to do some computer graphics. And there was like one computer in the world that could do it. And it was called a Cray supercomputer. And it was the only thing that was around. And now I could do it on my laptop. It's the same kind of work. Oop, I lost you.
Muted. I was just saying it's crazy how the technology has advanced. and I'm just curious. They never reached out to you to see if you would do a third film?
I would have said my bags are packed, but no,
Aww.
they didn't.
that makes me a little bit sad here because you did the second one, and I'm just curious as to what exactly they're kind of obviously they're going to just do an updated film, but I'm wondering how they're going to change it. So I guess we're going to find out. But I am kind of bummed they didn't ask you, so I'm sorry to hear that.
Would have been nice.
I don't know, although I don't know if they did remove like the projectors because did they have for the 2003 when that was added, they didn't have the digital projectors at that time for the showcase, the actual.
No, it when Reflections of China went in, it was the good old standard projectors and loop cabinets.
Okay, I'm going back in October, so I will. I
You'll
remember
have
I
to
saw
give
it
me a
last April,
report.
so yeah, I got to let you know. Is it still the projectors? I don't know. We're gonna have to find out. So, but yeah, that might be. If anybody's watching, if you're going back to EPCOT, you might want to keep an eye out. It's going to be called Wondrous China. Apparently the rumor is that it might be coming in 2024 because of how the ordeal of COVID has kind of pushed things back. So who knows when it will come out, but keep an eye out because we still love Wonders of China and Reflections of China, and I'm glad people are still able to with the technology we have. I saw online that some people now have those 360 cameras that they just plop in the middle of the theater so they could just film the entire thing, and then you can grab the camera and move around. So for me, I was like, oh, that's great. Because when I was watching it again before we chatted, I was like, oh, don't remember this. I don't remember this. It was really cool to see, things you can't always catch the first time you're watching it.
Well,
So
it's kind of a principle of not only the Circle Vision films, but all Disney projects. You're trying to have such a rich experience for the guests
yes.
that you can come back and see something new that you missed the first time or the second time or the third time.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously you can't see all 9 screens simultaneously.
No.
So there's going to be stuff that you miss. And, but that we, we're very, very careful about. I mean, it was very much a science, the approach to what's going to be in every screen. You didn't just film something and say, yeah, and then the back screens are whatever. Mm-hmm. No, we never did a whatever shot. They were always very carefully managed. And in fact, some of the most beautiful locations in China I couldn't use because the back screens would have been dreadful. The Chinese would have gone in and built, a power station or something that was in this beautiful vista, beautiful setting, but there was no way to hide the power plant, or the telephone lines or whatever. And so there were a lot of beautiful locations that we had to sort of pass on because there was no way to hide it. But, now who knows what they were able to do digitally. We'll find out.
Did you have a keepsake that you got from either your visit when you did the 1982 version or 2003 version that you have now today that you take great pride in?
I have, I picked up a ton of Chinese stuff, but the two things that have the most meaning for me, one is Li Po's costume, and second is the handwritten score by the Chinese composer Du Mingxin. His handwritten score, which he presented to me, which was great. Yeah.
That's what did he. That was all original material that he came up with, the music?
Yeah.
Did Disney ever discuss? This was another thing I was just mentioning, that I was kind of frustrated that when the 50th anniversary of Walt Disney World was celebrated, we didn't get like a CD set. Usually we used to get those, right? So did they ever talk about releasing that soundtrack? Because I know France got their own soundtrack released. I'm like, I would have loved to have had this.
If they have, I haven't heard about it. I don't know. I would love to think that somewhere there's that exists somewhere. I do have a 1/4-inch tape of all the music.
Ooh.
Yeah. They don't know about
that. They're probably not even watching, so shh. Well, Disney, if you are watching, let's go back to the archives and just pull out that record Makes
Well, you know,
sense.
so much of people's memories is tied up in the music.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
so I mean, what would Indiana Jones be without John Williams' themes? And a lot of the feelings that we have about China through the two films are because of the music.
And usually those who work on these films that are in theme parks don't really have a credit at the end of the film. Like there's none of that. So I wouldn't have known his name if you hadn't written it in the book, if you hadn't said it just now. So I didn't know who this individual was, which is another bummer, but I'm glad I want to hear more of their work. So this is another adventure I'm going to be taking online, just typing in later tonight just to hear some more of their music. So well, before we end, I always do a Kodak moment with my guests. So we just take a picture. So we're just going to look at the camera here and smile because we're going to make a memory. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, smile. Perfect. And as always, I like to again reiterate, you have to get your copy of Polishing the Dragons, a wonderful read, and you'll feel like you're there with Jeff reliving every single experience that he has. And
All the
you're
good and the bad.
good and the bad. And I think sometimes people like to sugarcoat things, and I'm glad you don't, because you need to understand like the perspective. It's your experience and how things are going on. But even with all the bugs, like I feel like I'm there with like all the bugs and just swiping them away. But then you say that you get to see these beautiful views and get to work with these really wonderful people. So I don't know. I think the good always outweighs the bad, but I'm glad you reference it. Regardless. And I just another joy when every time I go to Epcot. I love to go see the film, especially in the evening when there's like nobody there because the fireworks are about to happen. It's just another way to kind of escape. And I hope I get to China at one point, because it would be really great to walk in the footsteps that you took, along with the camera, that wonderful
Actually,
camera.
it was so funny to me at a couple of places there where I found myself walking in my own footsteps 20 years later. We did a scene. You remember the Tai Chi exercises?
Yes.
We had done it originally, and they were all in Mao jackets. And so now we're doing it again on the same location 20 some years later, and they're all very colorful silk outfits and whatever. And we had to go down there and get set up very early in the morning. It's dark, and we had to walk along this causeway. And as I'm doing it, I'm thinking, I walked this very same causeway 20 years earlier, and we're going right back to the same spot to do it again. It was sort of fun.
You time traveled. You did a time jump really quickly.
Yes.
Well, it's been so great to talk with you this evening. I was, and it's been so long since we really talked, and I'm so glad we got to really feature reflections of China and wonders of China, because it deserves that. And I think we don't get that type of theme park experience as often as I wish we would. And it's wonderful that it's still there after all these years. So that's another thing I'm really grateful for. I want to thank our audience who have been watching this evening. If you're enjoying these interviews and other reunions I've held on my channel, please feel free to subscribe. You can also comment below. Let us know what you liked. Anybody you else would like to hear from. And then you can follow me on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram. I'm at Tammy Tuckey. And on Facebook, I'm facebook.com/singer Tammy Tuckey. And you can head to my website at tammytuckey.com and get your copy of my new album, Glowing in Timeless Places, which does feature covers from the Walt Disney World theme parks that I think you might like. I guess the only thing is like Reflections of China never got its own song. So maybe they might add some, because Canada has one, right? So I think it's fine without a song. It does not need a song. It's just so beautiful to watch. But thank you again, Jeff, for being a guest on the show. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Tammy, for your great questions and your enthusiasm. It's really appreciated.
I got to see you soon. I still owe you a cheesesteak, a Philly cheesesteak. So hopefully I'll see you sooner than later. And thank you guys again for watching. See you soon. And remember the wonders and the reflections. Have a good evening, you guys. Bye, Jeff.
Bye-bye. Thanks, Tammy.